I bet you don't know who Candle in the Wind is originally about, because it's not Princess Diana and it's not even Marilyn Monroe. Let me explain. In 1997, the sudden death of Princess Diana shocked the world, of course. Tributes poured in from thousands of admirers, but the tribute that stood out the most was one from Diana's close personal friend, Elton John.
Now in the nave, Elton John sings Candle in the Wind with new words specially written a few days ago by Bernie Taupin.
Bernie Taupin, Elton John's long-term musical partner and lyricist, had written these lyrics to reflect the life of Diana. It opened with the line, "Goodbye England's rose, may you ever grow in our hearts." And the nation, as well as the world, fell in love with it.
Goodbye England's rose, may you ever grow in our hearts, you are the great.
It quickly shot to number 1 in the UK charts and was even named by Guinness World Records as the best-selling single of all time. However, what many people didn't realise at the time was that the song had already been released before. It was a rewritten and re-recorded version of a song that came out in 1973. Now, Candle in the Wind had originally been written for the album Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, and was about a completely different person. On the 1973 version, the opening line is Goodbye Norma Jean, the real name, of course, of 50s and 60s Hollywood starlet Marilyn Monroe. Monroe, too, had met a tragic end. 11 years before the first release of Candle in the Wind, Monroe had been found dead in her home, the victim of a sleeping pill overdose. Much like with Diana, the world was shocked by the news. The song describes somebody who is a victim of their own fame. The lyrics, "Even when you died, the press still hounded you," is a reference to how Monroe got so famous the press would run wild with accusations and stories. At the time of her death, she was constantly the victim of gossip and media frenzy. The same could be said for Diana as well, although that line didn't make it to the 1997 version. The origins of the song itself started with the title. Taupin first began writing the song after he'd heard a friend use the phrase "candle in the wind" to describe the life of Janis Joplin, who had also died tragically young. He liked the phrase and had always wanted to write a song for Monroe, but had struggled to do it in the right way. "I'd never found the right way of doing it without being incredibly tacky." However, Bernie Taupin and Elton John kept trying and eventually came up with the lyrics for Candle in the Wind. "I tried to make it a song that told you the reason she was so popular, and that she was very much somebody people could fall in love with, without her being out of reach. I really don't think people thought of her as a sex symbol." So this tribute to Marilyn Monroe was born.
You lived your life like a candle in the wind.
However, despite what early interviews suggest, Taupin later admitted that the focus on Marilyn Monroe had been a last-minute change before he started writing the song. Originally, the song was inspired by someone else entirely, a classic Hollywood star who had even worked with Marilyn Monroe, Montgomery Clift. Before I carry on, quick shout out for my Patreon page. If you like what I do and want to be more involved with the channel and support my journey as a creator, you can go to patreon.com/musicmongoose. Now, Clift was a serious young actor who had starred in Hollywood films throughout the 40s and 50s. In 1956, he was involved in a serious car crash on the way back from a dinner party at Elizabeth Taylor's house in LA. Now, Clift survived the crash, but suffered from life-changing injuries. He had to have plastic surgery on his face, and he suffered from chronic pain as a result of this. His face was permanently scarred from that point on as well. Clift was in the middle of shooting a movie at the time too, Raintree County. The left side of his face was so affected by the crash that when he returned a few months later to finish filming, the director made sure to shoot only the right side of his face. Clift continued to make movies for a long time, but ongoing pain made him turn to alcohol and drugs. And over the next 10 years, Clift's health and appearance deteriorated. And actually, this part of his life was described by acting teacher Robert Lewis as the longest suicide in Hollywood history. He started to behave erratically, worrying his friends and his loved ones. And it was later revealed that he was struggling with his sexuality at the time as well. He was a gay man, living at a time where that wasn't often accepted, especially as he played super masculine, manly men in all of his movies. Clift and Marilyn Monroe actually crossed paths when they starred in the film The Misfits together. And Monroe, who herself was facing addiction and mental health problems at the time, apparently said that Clift was the only person I know who is in even worse shape than I am. Which tells you everything, doesn't it? In 1966, Clift died of a heart attack in his New York home. Many people believe this was because of years of drug addiction. So Clift really did live his life like a candle in the wind, and he served as the original inspiration behind the song for Taupin, who was drawn to his tragic story. However, he realised that Clift was relatively unknown to a lot of people, and a song about Marilyn Monroe would draw a much bigger audience. I saw The Misfits and was fascinated by Montgomery Clift, who died young, but then I wondered how many people would know who he was. I didn't care for Marilyn, but people would think her a much more fragile character, and more indicative of the candle in the wind metaphor. So the final version of the original release was about Monroe rather than Clift, and it was that decision that cemented the legacy the song now has. Without the success of the original release, it wouldn't have had the parallels that made it the perfect song to rewrite for Princess Diana's death. In fact, after Diana's death, Elton John received a phone call to tell him that many people had been writing the lyrics to Candle in the Wind in the condolence book at St. James's Palace. It was from there that the idea to rewrite the lyrics especially for Diana came. Elton John informed Bernie Taupin and he managed to rewrite the lyrics in less than half an hour, which isn't bad for a record-breaking track. So depending on who you ask and what version you're listening to, Candle in the Wind is about 3 different people. But it really goes much deeper than even that. Taupin has spoken about how the song has no limit to who it's about. Instead, it's an ode to a certain type of person who lived their life like a candle in the wind. It's about the idea of fame or youth or somebody being cut short in the prime of their life. The song could have been about James Dean, it could have been about Montgomery Clift, it could have been about Jim Morrison, how we glamorise death, how we immortalise people. And Elton John seems to share this belief as well. For example, in 1990, he performed at Farm Aid and dedicated Candle in the Wind to someone called Ryan White, a teenager who was the poster child for AIDS awareness in the US after he contracted it from a blood transfusion. Elton John had become great friends with him. Ryan White sadly died the very next day. Elton John attended the funeral and of course continued his charitable work fighting AIDS. So while Candle in the Wind was originally written about Montgomery Clift, it's become so much more than that. It's become an ode to a specific type of person, anyone who's had their life tragically cut short, but who will live on forever through those who remember them. And while Elton John and Bernie Taupin have been criticised before for chopping and changing who the song is about, I think it actually makes the track more powerful. But speaking of which, did you know It's a Sin by the Pet Shop Boys is much deeper than you may have first thought? I've done a video on that song too, you can click here for that one.